if we start thinking about cost structures, then you've got fixed costs. And fixed costs are interesting, as we'll see, because that cost, since that cost is just something I've paid, it gets spread out over many goods. Whether I produce 1, 2, 10, I'm going to pay for the grill. The variable costs will depend on inputs, and then it depends on labor. So not surprisingly, what we start to realize that the cost of production is really going to depend on how much output I can get from the workers on the input. So cost structure is going to depend on productivity of labor. How much production can I get by hiring 1, 2, 5, 10 people and so on. And on the surface, it would seem like, yeah, hire 2 workers, you get twice as much output. Hire 4 workers, you get 4 times as much output, and so on. But it doesn't work that way with production. What we start to find is that when you look at production structures, you have to start thinking a little more carefully about how production actually gets organized and what kind of work output you can get depending on how many workers you've got. Right? So, in other words, I'm going to be interested in productivity. And I'm going to start by looking at total productivity. Right? So here is something to keep in mind. Initially, let us say I'm going to put labor here, and I'm going to put output here. So initially, let us say I got 1 worker, right? This is 1 worker. And this person made 10 sandwiches. Right? So over here, no workers, no production, 1 worker, 1 sandwich. Now, let's say that I'm going to increase this. I've got 2 workers here, that's 2. What happens is initially, when I start expanding production, because that's what I'm doing, the second worker won't just give me 10 more sandwiches. So it's not just going to go from 10 to 20. I might be able to increase productivity, that is the output I'm getting per worker, because now they might be having some divisions of labor. So we can be like, okay, you watch the grill, I'll chop the tomatoes, right? So I can start dividing things up so that instead of 1 worker making the sandwich by being the person who chops the tomatoes, grills the bread, puts the lettuce, people divide up the work. Right? And I start saying, okay, when I've got 2 workers, instead of going from 10 to 20, I might even be able to go from 10 to 22, right? Up here. And then the third worker, maybe I went 22, 32, even 35, let's say, something up here. But what you want to start noticing is that so see, I'm not only going up, I'm going up at a pretty fast rate, right? Over here like that, initially. But let's keep going. And of course, the more workers I have, initially, I will actually get more product. But the 4th worker comes, and the 4th worker is not going to be able to just give me 10 more, 15 more, because now people are getting in each other's way. There's only 1 grill. I'm not going to be able to go straight 10, 20, 30, 40 like that. Right? So maybe 35, I might go to 40, which is here. Then with the 4th worker, then with the 5th worker, instead of going to 50, I might actually go to 40 to 48. And so what you see is while I'm getting more and more stuff, the rate at which I'm getting more stuff starts to go down. And there's going to be a point at which, given that I've got 1 grill, it really is not going to make sense for me to hire the 18th worker. Okay? I'm really not going to get a whole bunch of stuff out of them at that point. So what you start to see is that production functions have a very characteristic shape. Additional workers do increase my production, But while in the early phases of increase, I can have some pretty rapid increase, in the later phases of increase, my increase is going to be not quite as rapid. And since I'm thinking about each additional worker, okay, this extra worker, how much should I get? What I'm talking about is marginal productivity. How much extra stuff is the next worker I hire going to get me? So when I have 10 workers, I'm now considering, should I hire an 11th worker or not? At that point, I'm considering how much extra stuff will that extra worker get me? Because that's how I think of production decisions. So marginal productivity becomes crucial for firm decision making. And what we are encountering is the law. This is one of the most important laws in economics. It's a law which isn't which economists treat as being pretty much true for all production. Maybe not all the time, maybe not at all scales, and we'll come to that later on. But most smallish, medium-sized, profit maximizing, price-taking firms operate in this range, right? And we're going to call this the law of diminishing marginal productivity. The law of diminishing marginal productivity. That additional workers add not quite as much, diminishing, not quite as much output compared to the previous workers, right? So the law of diminishing marginal productivity is going to have implications for my cost structure. So it's going to mean that as I increase workers, I'm going to still have to pay each extra worker whatever the going wage is, right? So if the wage is $20 an hour, I'll have to pay the next worker $20 an hour. I'll have to pay the next worker $20 an hour. But while the wage is the same and the workers are each getting paid $20 an hour, by the time you come to the 18th worker, that extra worker is not adding that much to your production. Do you see that? And so the law of diminishing marginal productivity will then mean that a simple expansion, that you keep on adding workers, and that's going to keep helping you produce more and more, and it's going to be profitable, will not make sense. So profit maximization is always going to be shaped by the law of diminishing marginal productivity, because the law of diminishing marginal productivity is going to have an impact on your total costs. Because each extra worker is going to cost you that extra $20 an hour, whatever, but that each extra worker will not end up giving you that same volume or same value for money for the next worker. So diminishing marginal productivity is going to be central to how we begin to think of total costs and how we maximize profit, which will be the next video.